In this lesson, you'll have the opportunity to learn about some of the new features in Photoshop CS6 by putting together an exciting composition. Now keep in mind that users of all levels can follow this step-by-step exercise. But if you're a new user, we recommend you start with Lesson 2, where you can learn about the workspace, and then come back to this after you're more familiar with Photoshop and its tools and its workspace. So this is the file that you're going to create, and you'll notice that you have a background and you have a shape layer and some strokes on here and some text. So I'm going to close the ps0101 done file that you also have in your ps01 lessons folder, and I'm going to go into File, Browse and Bridge, and open up the Start file, which is simply called ps0101. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and grab the rectangle tool and click and drag this off to the right. Now it doesn't really matter what color has come in here, but if you have reset your preferences, it will default to black. But like I said, if it's blue, yellow, doesn't matter at this point, because we're going to take advantage of the new vector fill and stroke features up here in the options panel. So I'm clicking on Fill, and I'm clicking on the button for patterns. And I certainly don't want that pattern, but I do have one here on the end called Gray Granite. I'm going to select that and then click anywhere up here in the options panel to close that window again. Now next, I want to select another custom shape. So I'm going down to the rectangle vector shape tool and I'm selecting Custom Shape tool, and then I'm going up to my options panel, and the shape I want to create isn't here. So I'm going over to this gear and I'm selecting that I want to add nature shapes to this panel. So I select nature and I choose append. If I clicked OK, all the existing shapes would go away and they would be replaced with the nature shapes. I'm selecting append to add them to the end. I'm selecting the snowflake and then again clicking up on my options panel to close that window. Now I want a shape of a snowflake that starts over here in the middle of the left side, but I don't want to add it on top of this shape. I actually want to go up to the options panel and choose to subtract from that shape. So I go to the path operations, select subtract front shape, and since I want the shape to come from the center, I'm holding down my Alt or Option key and dragging out. Now after I start dragging, if I add the Shift key, I can also constrain this so that it stays proportional. But it doesn't really matter what kind of shape you get here or how wide. All I want you to see is that when you release, that you've subtracted that snowflake shape from your other shape, but yet they're still on that same shape layer. The great thing is, if you messed up, you can immediately just press Control Z or Command Z and then start this again. Now the next thing I want to do is put a mask on this layer. So I'm going down to the layers panel and I'm clicking on Add a Layer Mask. Now so you can see this a little better, I'll drag by clicking on the Layers tab my panel out, and then I'll click on the Add Layer Mask button. And you'll see that this mask has been put on the right side. This works very much like a traditional fill mask, whereas if I took a paintbrush, and I don't want you to do this, I want you just to watch, but if I took a paintbrush and I switched to having a black foreground and I started painting, wherever you see that black blob there, it's covering up the content of that image. If I switch and I paint white, you can now see that I can see the image. So even though I messed this up, it's okay. I can fix it in the next step. Note that I can either select the image itself or the mask itself. You want to make sure that you click on the mask and that's what's active. You also want to press the letter D to make sure that you're back to the default colors of black and white. Take your gradient tool and click and drag from the right to the left, and you'll see that you can create a mask that fades this shape into the rest of the image. Now note that if I make a little line, I have a small gradient, a longer line, a smoother, more gradual gradient. You can choose one that works best for you. If you don't want to see this vector path here, you can go under View, Show, and uncheck Target Path. Then you can see a little better what you're working on. Now next, I want to show you some of the new strokes you can take advantage of. So I'm clicking on Background, and then I'm holding down my Alt or Option key and clicking on Create New Layer. Now the reason why I selected the background layer first is so that when I create this new layer, it goes directly on top of the background layer. And the reason I held down the Alt or Option key is so that I can name this new layer as I create it. And I want to call this Strokes. This gives me the opportunity to experiment with some brushes without destroying my original file. So I'm now going to the brush tool, and I'm going up to my Options panel, and I'm selecting Toggle the Brush Panel. And as you scroll down in here, you'll notice that there's some new brushes that have been added. Some erodible brushes, some airbrush, some scatter brushes. In this first example, I want to show you an erodible brush. So I'm selecting one of the erodible points. You can select any. And if you want to just mess up this image, that's okay, because if you remember, we have this blank layer we're working with. But if I start brushing away with the erodible brush, do you see my brush tip over here? Watch it as I'm brushing away. It becomes thicker, and so does my brush tip. That's because this acts almost like a pencil, where you get the tip a little bit more dull as you work in this. But at any time, I can sharpen this tip. And if you look over my brush panel, watch over here, after I click on Sharpen Tip, look at this brush tip. You'll see it comes right back to being sharp again, and then I have a thin, crisp line again. Great for drawing if you like that free-form look. Now, after experimenting with some of these brushes, what I want you to do is go back to your Layers panel, make sure that Strokes is still selected, let's hope it is, and do a Control-A or Command-A to select all, and then just press the Delete or Backspace key to get rid of all those strokes. Deselect all by pressing Control-D or Command-D, or if you don't like using keyboard commands, go under Select to deselect. Now, what I want you to do is go back up. If you don't see your brush panel, click on the Toggle the Brush Panel up in the Options panel for the brush tool. And I want you to scroll down through this list and locate the Airbrush 80. Now, if you notice, this airbrush looks a little interesting because it's got some spatter amounts set in it. I'm going to have you change some of these settings and then make some snow flying off the skier in the image. So I want you to change the hardness to 5, and after you type 5, you can press Tab to automatically go down to the distortion text field. Type in 0, type 45 for granularity, 15 for spatter size, 50% for spatter amount, and change the spacing amount to 25. So you can see now a preview of what my brush looks like. Then I'm coming over to my Tools panel and clicking on the default foreground and background color to make sure I have black and white. And then I'm also clicking on the Swap Color so that I now have the white in the foreground and the black in the background. And I'm just going to go ahead and start painting. Now you can see this is a little too much, and that's fine because we're on our own Strokes panel, so we can delete this, or it can simply press Control-Z or Command-Z. The reason I did that is so that you could see that you can also go up to your flow and change this in the Options panel to something a little bit lighter. Now the flow is how fast that airbrush paint is coming out of the airbrush. So if I set this for 25, you see I get a much more subtle result, and then I can kind of build it up as I want instead of having it all coming out at once. Now if I want to, I can save this brush by going down to the brush panel and click on the Create New Brush button, and I can call this My Brush and add it to this menu so that anytime I want to use it, it's down here at the end. Okay, next I want to add some more graphic snowflakes to this image. So I'm going back to the Custom Shape, selecting the Custom Shape tool, and this time I'm going up to the Shape drop-down menu and I'm selecting the snowflake 3. Instead of just clicking and dragging on my image, I'm going to click once, and that gives me the opportunity to create a custom shape, and I'm going to type 60 by 60 and click OK. I'm going to close the brush panel so you can see what happened in the layers panel. A new shape has appeared in here. With this shape, I can go up to fill and determine that I want no fill, and go up to the stroke and use a 50% gray and change the point size to a 2. So you can see I've created this little shape in here. I'm taking the move tool that's clear but also has a stroke. Next, I'm going back to the custom shape tool. Now the reason I'm doing this is I want to go back and edit the stroke. But you'll see that as long as I'm not on this vector tool, I don't have those options up there in the options panel. So I click back on custom shape. I'm on that layer still. So I'm going to click on set stroke type. I'm going to go ahead in and choose that I want to align this on the center. So I have a different stroke effect. It's now aligned on the center of that vector path. And I'm also going to set round for caps and corners. I also want to go into more options because I do want a dash line, but I want my own custom dash line. So I'm just going in and putting a dash of 2 and a gap of 2. And you'll see that I can create my own repeat and click OK. The next thing I want to do is duplicate this shape. So I'm selecting the Move tool. I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, and I'm cloning this a few times so I have more of these snowflakes. Note that since these are vector, I can take these snowflakes, and if I want to, I can select them, press Ctrl or Command T, and transform them and make them larger or smaller, but they will always remain, which means they're not going to look bad as you increase or decrease them in size. Once I've transformed some of these, you'll notice that I have to click on the Commit button or press the Return or Enter key. If I want to move one of these layers, I can select it over in the Layers panel, or what I can do, which is much easier, is hold down the Control if I'm on the PC or Command if I'm on the Mac and just click on these shapes to select them. Control or Command turns on Auto Select temporarily, and what happens with that is that when you Control or Command click on an item, it will select and activate that layer automatically for you. I'm going to add some text, but how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go under File, Browse and Bridge, and I'm going to open up a separate file. And you'll see that I have 2 layers in here. So I click on the one layer and then shift click on the other, and from the panel menu I'll choose Duplicate Layers, but since I want them to move in the exact same position to another document, I can choose that I want them to move to another open document and click OK. And when I close these, they're together in the same place on this new image. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take the top text, and I want to push this together a little bit more. You'll notice that if I put my cursor between the P and the U and I hold down my Alt or Option key and then press the arrow to the left, that I can do something called kerning. If I select the entire word and then press the Alt or Option and the arrow in or out, that's called tracking. So I'm just doing this for a visual effect. When I'm done changing this text, I can click on the Confirm button and then select the powder because it's in a separate text layer, and then I'll do the same thing. I might even just put my cursor between the P and the O and pull that in even further. Now I'm going to make an additional change in here. I'm going to take powder and maybe I actually want to use bold. I've made a style change to this. So not only have I tracked it in a little bit, but I've also changed the font. Maybe I even want to select it and change the size slightly. What if you're working on a document that has a whole bunch of text on it and you don't want to go through all those changes for all of your text areas? The great thing is that I can go into Window, into Paragraph Styles, And I can go to the panel menu and choose New Paragraph Style. Double click on this and you'll see that all the characteristics of the text that I have selected at this point are recorded. So when I click OK, I can select the other text and apply that same style. Now I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to call it my text style just so that I can remember it, or call it something that's more appropriate depending upon what you're doing. But you'll notice that this is now tagged to my text style, as is the pure text above. And if I come back here and I decide that I actually do want it to be 90 points, I can change that here. And now it's updated my text that was used out in my image area. So in this lesson, you touched on some of the new features that are available in Photoshop CS6. A lot more are going to be covered throughout the rest of the book. So keep reading to see how these new features integrate into the tasks that you need to perform in Photoshop CS6.